Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
To be white in America is to claim an identity that attempts to be deracialized and is predicated upon the receipt of power and privilege simply based on one's appearance, a racialized appearance. So the fundamental equation is that whiteness equals access to power and privilege based on one's racial identity. We can trace every major economic, health, educational, access to criminal justice resources in the country, and when we trace those statistics, it continues to be the case that the white community receives and has access and is benefited by those systems. And communities of color, however we define them, whether African American, Native American, Latino, Asian American, have proportionally less access and resource from those systems. So we continue to see racism being an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed systemically and not just relationally. We start by engaging in organizing efforts that are no longer predicated with white people being in charge of how the change happens, no longer with white people being the ones to make the decisions about what the emphasis of the organizing efforts will be, but rather look for truly multicultural and multiracial collectives that have a common understanding of the way racism acts, and because of that are freed of the paternalism and white noblesse oblige that comes through when we don't understand that racism isn't just there to keep us from saying bad words, but rather racism is there to ensure that the dynamics of power and privilege take place. So the shorter answer is we need to find ways to build collectives and coalitions that have a clear analysis of racism, and that's going to make us much more effective in overturning systemic injustice.
My name is Kia Abbey, and I am one of the coordinators of the Sustained Dialogue program at Montana State. And to tonight's program about white privilege, we thought important to bring to the university, since we are such a racially homogenous campus. I mean, we do have, it's a predominantly white population, and it's important that we're having conversations about what that means for the identity of campus and the identity of our institution, and the impact that has on our students of color that we have on campus. In terms of Dr. Shearer's talk, I think he did a great job in such a short time of explaining the concept of white privilege, because it can be a scary concept, and a concept that causes shame and guilt and questioning and anger and frustration. And I think he presented it in a way that provided for a context of understanding rather than a context of anger, which is important, because recognizing your privilege isn't about guilt. It's about awareness and understanding how power plays a role in your life and the opportunities you're granted.
But in as much as those who are writing and developing those foreign policies are often bringing an innate sense of superiority, which is directly connected to the history of race in this country, then absolutely there's a connection. It would be a little bit more difficult to trace that country by country, but I think those more well-versed in international politics than I could make that connection pretty directly. Well, an immediate example that comes to mind are the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that were put in place after the end of apartheid in South Africa. That was an imperfect process, but it did aim to actually get the experience of those who've been oppressed by that nation's system of apartheid recognized and acknowledged and out in public. We've had hints of those kind of processes in the past, but nothing on the scale that was attempted in South Africa.
So I think he did a great job. I hope that in the dialogues, our participants are touching on the intersectionality of white privilege and what it means, especially in Montana, to be a predominantly white state with a high level of poverty and a large population living in rural communities, and how the intersectionality of those identities create certain circumstances in our state. I hope that they're getting to explore their experiences a little bit more with race, and they'll walk out of here with at least catalyzing a desire to understand their own identities more because of the experience they've had at the dialogue.
Educate yourselves about the reality of race not only in this country, but in this state as well. I think the greatest danger anyone can do, students or others, is to simply assume that you know, that you have what you need to know from the public media. People are uninformed. We need to understand the kinds of history of white privilege and power and racism that I was discussing tonight in order to be informed and to stop making fools of ourselves in many instances.
Context of White Supremacy. Justice Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of racism, white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, February 13th, 2014, so I have been told. We were scheduled to have a program yesterday. That was Wednesday, the 12th of February. We were supposed to have a black male guest with us from the UK. We had a breakdown in communication, and he had some things that popped up with his schedule. He and his wife are new parents, so we had to reschedule. But that was what threw off our attempted broadcast for yesterday. We should be back tomorrow. That would be Friday, February 14th. Madiba, Long Walk to Freedom, installment number 10. Looking forward to continued participation from our listening audience. The broadcast today just continues to emphasize the importance of checking the news, local, national, global level. Racism, white supremacy is discussed on a pretty regular basis, sometimes explicitly, often indirectly in the news. I found out about our guest for today's broadcast just checking the news. There was in Montana. They had a lecture series where they were talking about quote unquote white privilege, i.e. racism. And our guest for today's program was one of the speakers. I always enjoy hearing from white people to see if they're going to speak truthfully, give up some accurate information about the system of white supremacy. Our guest for today's broadcast, he is the director of African American Studies at the University of Montana. In addition, he has areas of research, including religious history, the civil rights movement, quote-unquote interracial congregations, and the Fresh Air rural housing programs. I know some of our listening audience, they're familiar with the Fresh Air program, might have even been participants in the program, so it'll be good to bring that up as well. Our guest has 20 years experience as an anti-racism consultant and workshop facilitator. We'll discuss his 1994 publication, Enter the River, Healing Steps from White Privilege to Racial Reconciliation. Be looking forward to hearing his views. Pleasure to have him on the program. Joining us live this evening, Dr. Tobin Miller Shearer. For folks who have not seen you, you are a white male, Dr. Shearer, is that correct?
That's correct.
Outstanding. This program, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy. I use those two terms as synonyms, and I have the same definition for both terms. The definition is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you think that is an accurate definition?
Yeah, my study of history, and I'll be clear, I'm a student of United States history, So I would qualify my depth of expertise outside of that context. We've had a consistent history of maintaining power and privilege for those who have come to be called white. And I would assert in your definition that at this point, given the way those systems have been set up, we no longer require personal intention for systemic racism to continue. In many ways, it doesn't require volition on part of individuals due to the socialization processes and the systems of power and privilege that have been put in place over the last number of centuries here in the United States.
Right on. I would point out, just for pattern's sake, because I think that is important, I think many of the white guests whom have been on our broadcast, they point out intentionality, and I don't really say anything about intention in my definition, even though I do believe that white people are dedicated, and I believe that white people's dedication to racism is expressed consciously and unconsciously with regards to this system being in place. But I definitely agree with what you said. I think that's accurate as well, that we are at a point of refinement where that is not even required because there's been so much programming. In fact, to start with that programming, I guess I would make a request if we could. You even write about it in your book. You talk about the difficulty in talking about racism in Into the River. I would request if we could have as much honesty as possible, and with your responses, if you could be as accurate as possible and efficient. And if that even means lowering your vocabulary, because it's been my experience that I think frequently in conversations of racism, it's a lot of jargon, particularly in academic circles. There's a lot of jargon and kind of talking around things without really being as accurate and specific as we can to make sure that there's clear understanding of what's being said. So if you can make an effort to be as efficient and accurate with your responses, I would really appreciate that, and I'll prompt you if I feel like that's a concern. Good. Right on. To kind of start off with your book, you have a whole chapter about what it means to be white. You also talk about white culture, and even your response about the programming has been so pervasive that the system with regards to racism, it doesn't even necessarily require a white person to be conscious or deliberately doing any things, because there's so much programming that you even have a lot of non-white people who just are following the racist script about how you're supposed to think and behave in a system that supports racism, white supremacy. To go to current events, Shirley Temple Black, she passed away just in the past couple days, really. Been a lot of commentary on her extensive film career as a young actress, and then her later diplomatic service as well. Just speaking about her film career, can you talk about how a lot of the films that Shirley Temple Black participated in, how that perpetuates the system of racism, white supremacy?
Well, I could speak in a very limited fashion. I don't know the full extent of her film career. I do know that in at least one film she appeared in blackface, and I mean that whole history of the minstrelsy tradition is highly problematic, as we know, overtly racist, and she was part and parcel of that at a very young age. So we can at least point to that. I would have to claim it's out of my depth of expertise to talk about the breadth of her film. But again, I know she's been in films where she's not only wearing blackface, but where she was playing the stereotypical role of the white ideal child. That's a problem.
For folks who, I guess, maybe are not as informed, even though I think that would be kind of difficult, unless you're really young, unless you're like 15 or younger, Justice's age, maybe you don't know who Shirley Temple is, but I would tend to think if you're even 25 and up, you know who Shirley Temple is. You at least have some vague recollection, or people at least shot a picture of her on a screen or what have you. You know, oh, that's Shirley Temple, okay. This is from a report. It's titled Dear Pecola and Claudia, Shirley Temple is Dead, by Nordette Adams. This was published yesterday. You can check it out online. She writes, I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm just reading a quick passage. She writes, as a child then, for me, the measure of whether a white person was nice or mean was, will they let you be near them? I had seen Shirley Temple dance with Bill Robinson in The Littlest Rebel and Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, so she must be nice. At 5 years old, that was as close as I came to today's critical race theory. It was not until later that I understood the movie's racialized images and the racism that produced them. Bill Robinson, black male, Uncle Billy in the movie, was the slave of Shirley Temple's character, Virgie. Yes, Virgie's family was on the wrong side, but I didn't know that when I was 4 or 5 or 6 because I was not old enough yet to have learned in class that my people were once owned by white people. That's not information black parents share before they have to. And Shirley, when she was filmed for the movie, didn't know that either, according to what she said in interviews during the 1990s. Still, I knew more about racism when I was 6 than she did when she was 6. Back then, I did not know how seeing Shirley Temple on television had begun to shape my understanding of what it meant to be an adorable girl. I don't recall trying to emulate her. According to an older cousin, I was more likely to imitate an adult, but I do recall hearing my mother say to my aunt before she straightened my hair with the hot comb, and give her Shirley Temple curls, end quote. I recall as well at age 5 that I walked down the aisle of New Orleans' old municipal auditorium to the lofty sounds of pomp and circumstance, a train flowing behind me, my body covered with a white pearl encrusted gown, a fake piece of hair to hold my tiara in place, and my own hair bouncing at my ears in those desirable curls. I was the princess of my dance school because my parents had raised the most money for my age group. A teen was the school's queen. But I was not very sweet or adorable that night. My mother told me I didn't want anyone to stand in the pictures with me. Did I think I was Shirley Temple? I don't remember thinking that. Did I ever want to be Shirley Temple? No, like Claudia in The Bluest Eye, I was not impressed with my white baby doll. I recall holding a black doll, and later I think I begged my parents for a life-size doll 3 feet tall that only came in white. Of course, it had blue eyes, but once I had it, I didn't like it. It scared me, and I hid it in the closet. I will stop there. You all can read the rest of the post. It goes on, but I think the entire genre of work, Shirley Temple's films as a young child, I think that goes a great deal to the question about what it means to be a white person. You have a whole chapter in your book that talks about what does it mean to be white. I will ask you, as a white person, what does it mean to be white? And I mean in a functional sense.
Yeah, I think Peggy McIntosh has probably done the most foundational work in helping us articulate that in a list of privileges form. I regularly do workshops in which I identify the practical ways in which I receive privileges, assumptions of power, and assumptions of control, and am given access to institutions simply based on assumptions made about my racial identity. So the classic ones would be being I can go into a drugstore, find a flesh-colored Band-Aid, and have that more or less match my skin tone. I am often assumed to be the one who is in charge of a group. I am given the benefit of the doubt. I can tell stories of having been given the benefit of the doubt from criminal justice officers. I was once stopped for suspicion of drunk driving and did not have the insurance of the car I was driving. It was a loan car from it was loaned to me by friends. And in the middle of Kansas, the police officer let me go. I know that would not be an experience of a person of color in that setting. I could talk at length about the different forms that privilege has taken, but as a number of other writers have indicated, I'll quote Robert Terry here, to be white in America is fundamentally not to have to think about it. And I think that in addition to the access to power and privilege, the simple absence of reflection on one's racial identity is one of the most fundamental forms that white identity takes.
Okay. This is one of those where I will prompt and I specifically ask about function. Dr. Peggy McIntosh, she's been a guest on the program before.
Sure.
I'm very familiar with her work.
Yeah.
This is one of the ways that I think white people, in my view, it's conscious, it's deliberately practice racism. They will talk about racism in terms of the benefits that they get. And I feel it is inaccurate. I feel it's done purposely because it confuses what it means to be white. It confuses the issue of racism. What you just said and everything that she lists, the bandages and all that, in my view, it's not profound. It's obvious. It's talking about racism in a manner as though the white privilege fairy comes in every day and leaves flesh-colored bandages, passports, Starbucks gift cards, gift certificates to the Gap or your other favorite restaurants, all these little goodies, and you don't do anything. And that, in my view, is totally false. There have to be white people who are actively doing things to mistreat non-white people, practice racism, to get all of those benefits. The way that you just described racism, white supremacy, it's very passive. That's not really a way that you function as a white person. It's just all of the things that, all of the goodies white people get in a system of racism, white supremacy, without really getting to what has to be done to produce all of that and to make sure that non-white people don't get all of those goodies. So I'll ask the question again, getting to a functional sense. What do white people have to do? What are you expected to do as a white person?
I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. What are we expected to do as white people in order to participate in the system of racism?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a number of things. I mean, one is to remain quiet when you see active, overt racism towards people of color, to cooperate with the system. It shows up in hiring decisions that white people make that ensure that other white people are getting disproportionate access to the jobs that are giving people livelihoods around us. It requires that members of the white community are also responding to people of color in ways that are, as you note, ensuring they end up in disproportionate numbers in the criminal justice system, ensuring that we do not interfere with that process, whether we are passive observers to it, whether we are in social situations where we are refusing to interrupt racial jokes, if we are not challenging the lending practices of our banks, if we are allowing those systems to move forward uninterrupted, we are participating in the system.
Can you detail some of the ways that you've done that over your lifetime as a white person?
That I've resisted or that I've participated?
Participated.
Well, yeah. Let's see. I try to think of practical examples. I think one of the questions you set me ahead of time was to ask how I, as a white person, decided to speak out about racism. And I was a member of a religious nonprofit social service group in New Orleans in the early 80s. I had accepted an assignment to work in that city, a predominantly African-American city, as part of this white-led and white-controlled organization, an organization that claimed to have the best interests of the communities in which it was working. And my initial placement was with a organization that worked with homeless men and former and ex-offenders, and I came to the realization that I was having a very hard time accepting working under a black supervisor. I've written about it in Enter the River that you quoted earlier, And through that process, I eventually resigned and came to recognize that I had some real issues I had to deal with if I could not even accept a black man as my supervisor. And so began to do some reflection and seek out instruction from local African-American partners to help us change the way we were working within that city. So that would be a practical example that comes to mind.
Definitely appreciate that. I feel that's pretty common, at least from what I've heard from other white people and even experiences that I've had from non-white people who said that they felt that from white people that they've been working with. Do you have some other examples, either where you yourself were practicing racism, white supremacy, and or you were in the company of other white people who were practicing racism and you didn't do anything, or they just expected that you as a white person would be a willing accomplice in their acts of racism?
Yes, in my adult life, I've taken a decision to interrupt them as much as possible. I'll tell you two incidents. I'll tell you one in which I was not successful and one in which I was a little bit more successful. In speaking out in the face of racial dynamics. I co-led an anti-racism training and organizing collective with an African-American woman. We had worked together for a period of about 8 or 9 years and were actually in the midst of leading a workshop about racism at a college. And my partner was in front of the room leading the discussion. And we came to a question and answer point, and one of the members of the group asked me a question, even though she was in front of the room in charge of the group, and I responded to that. But I kept responding to questions, so that within the space of about 10 minutes, I was then in front of the room, and my partner was off to the side. It was a painful, difficult experience. We then recognized what had happened. We took a break. We used it as a learning moment. I confessed what I had done, stepping into that power of power and privilege, and we made some changes in how we as a collective worked to ensure that we wouldn't do that again in the future. So that's a place where I failed, clearly. There was a family gathering that we were attending, an extended family gathering with my wife and 2 sons when they were much younger. They were, I think at that age, kindergarten, maybe a little bit younger. Large family gathering, about 100 people in the room, middle of Iowa, and we're having a skit night, an entertainment night. One of our family members had gotten a skit together, and within 3 minutes it became apparent that they were using a racial stereotype in the midst of this skit. A white man was essentially portraying a black man in a racist fashion.
Can you give us details? What was he doing or saying?
Oh boy, he was using a offensive accent. He was making the character look stupid, look intellectually inferior. That's probably all the detail I have in my memory anymore. What I then did was come to the front of the room, take the microphone, and say, this is something I promised my kids I would never do again. I would never sit silent in the face of an act of racism, and challenged our family system to deal with what had just happened. Over the course of the next 2 days of this gathering, there were tears, there was difficult conversations. I can't tell you what the long-term results of that were, but that was an instance where I had the courage to take this small, tiny little act of refusing to be silent in the midst of a racist act.
Context of white supremacy. I'm glad that you pointed out family as well, because I think I'm very resistant when people talk about racism, white supremacy, and before I even get to that, jargon. When you started off, the first vignette that you shared about doing, I guess, some sort of workshop on white supremacy, racism, and you were working with a black female, and you said racial dynamics. I feel like that's one of those type jargony words that white people use frequently. I believe it's conscious to obfuscate racism, white supremacy, where you get racial dynamics, racially insensitive incident. I think that's the one that I hear more frequently now, that he or she was racially insensitive. It never gets said that racism was practiced, that this person was practicing racism, that this was an act or an incident of racism, white supremacy. It never gets called that way. It ends up being all these other terms that move away from it. That would be one. But the second thing, I feel like it's very difficult, and even that, what I just mentioned, is a part of it. It becomes almost impossible to locate a white person that is practicing racism, and I feel like that's one of the main problems. We continue to think of white supremacy, racism, as being this thing that is just out there in the atmosphere. Maybe it fell from the heavens, its customs, its cultures. No, it is white people like your family members that you mentioned. And I feel like if we had more white people that were being honest, they could talk about their family members. They could talk about themselves, their neighbors, white people that they're around on a regular basis, their coworkers who are saying and doing racist things, but it rarely gets talked about in that manner. And I think that's one of the things that mightily contributes to the confusion and why we haven't solved this problem. And really, I would say just the incident that you just shared, the latter, with your family members, where they're doing this racist skit in the offensive portrayal of a black person. And it goes all the way back, Shirley Temple. At the very beginning, it sounds very similar to some of the black characters and the way that they behaved, if I heard it correctly, in a lot of those old black and white Shirley Temple films.
Absolutely.
You have a subservient black person, and I would even say the thread running all that together, even the incident that you shared about the difficulties that you had working for a black, quote-unquote, supervisor. Black people aren't supposed to be in positions of power. Black people are supposed to be just like what your family member was portraying, just like what is being portrayed in Shirley Temple. So you got a longitudinal perspective on this. That's the way that white people perceive, and really that's the way that they go about acting to make sure that's the way that black people, non-white people, are functioning, in subservient to white people at all times, even if it's an adult, quote unquote, black person being subservient to a white child. And you see that dynamic play out today. You have in your book, I'm reading, this is direct passage, you write that, as we'll examine later, and this is on page 98, you write, as we'll examine later, it is probably more helpful for members of the dominant culture, white people, to celebrate the gifts of our own individual cultures rather than the far too amorphous white culture. Knowledge of our cultural roots and contemporary shifts and changes in those groupings provide us with solid grounding for interaction with other cultures. Each culture has gifts and weaknesses. Let's celebrate our strengths and work with our weaknesses. Page 98 from your book. I would assert the example that you just shared, it's so widespread. I hear that all the time, where white people get together and they have racist jokes, racist skits. I think many have argued successfully that the entire entertainment genre is based around all these little racist depictions of black people, going all the way back to vaudeville and Jim Crow. Long blackface, as you said, long legacy of this. Shirley Temple and her films being celebrated right now. I'm sure if anyone has the A&E network or some of the old Turner Classic, I'm sure Shirley Temple is going to be playing ad nauseum right now. I would assert white culture is not amorphous, as you stated. I would assert that racism is white culture, and it's reflected in a myriad of ways. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah. White identity is, as you assert, intrinsically connected to racist acts and the receipt and maintenance of that over time. I guess my argument, and I'm quite open to be challenged on this, and I would share this not as my own original thinking, but would honor those who have mentored me in these discussions, groups like People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, Crossroads Ministry, and others, and I draw on their thinking in my response on the use of the term amorphous white culture. I think you're correct to note that there's a direct linkage between white culture and acts of racism. I am not convinced, however, that we can equate culture within the white community in the same way we talk about culture in other racialized communities. And the argument that the groups I just referred to earlier would make was that over time, as white people became white, because as we know, this was a historical process that was very deliberately put in place, that exchange for many of those previous so-called ethnic groups, Noah Ignatieff and others have written, for example, about how the Irish became white. We note how Italians became white, how members of the Polish community became white, that there was an exchange of the indigenous cultural roots of music and dancing and clothing and distinct ethnic identities. There was an exchange of those kind of life-giving elements of culture for the access to power and privilege, that we left behind those ethnic identities in order to become white. And obviously this is a complex historical process. As a historian, I have to talk about the nuances, but the end result has been that exchange over time. I'll stop there and see if I've answered your question.
Not really. I would even say that response right there, Noel Ignatieff, I'm very familiar with his work. He's been a guest on our program. Even some of the other folks, Dr. Karen Brodkin, she wrote how, quote-unquote, Jews became white. I'm very familiar with all of that. And even I feel that makes my point, but that response was not very efficient. That's one of those where I suspect that could be a willful act of racism to obfuscate what seems obvious to me. If we're saying that for individuals who were at one time not considered white, for them to be accepted as white, they had to accept, quote unquote, white identity, white culture, which is racism. I think Noel Ignatieff, he makes that point very clearly in his book, How the Irish Became White. What does that mean? Abusing, terrorizing, mistreating black people specifically. I think Dr. Karen Brodkin, she makes that point pretty explicitly in How Jews Became White Folks. Mistreatment of non-white people. That seems to me to be very equivalent with white culture. It's not amorphous. If anything, I think white people do that on a regular basis to hide what it means to be white, so that it does not end up being linked with racism, white supremacy. I can't think of anything more sterling, more consistent with regards to white culture than the act of racism. And it would be that way all over the world. You brought up South Africa, apartheid. I can't think of any other aspect that is more central, more fundamental to white identity, white culture than white supremacy, racism. I would say they are synonyms.
Point taken. And just for listeners, I don't think I feel like Dr. Shearer, as a white person, I think he understands this much better than I do. This is not where I'm trying to inform him. This is something I'm hoping listeners grasp. I'm not ever really trying to inform white people. I've concluded they are the experts on racism, white supremacy. You live in a community, I mean, you can tell us. You said you live in a community that is over 90% white in Montana. Is that correct? Yeah, I actually just checked it's about 89%, but yeah, absolutely. That's the racial profile of Montana.
Okay. And has that been done deliberately to make sure that this area remains predominantly white? Would you say that that is an act of quote unquote white culture, white identity, racism, white supremacy, the population in your state?
Cannot be separated from that history. Absolutely.
Okay. For folks who are listening in, if you have any questions for Dr. Tobin Miller Shearer, feel free, chime in. The number 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. This is right in your book. You write that you worked with many people of European descent who had not previously spent much time thinking about racism. Once they came in contact with a definition of racism that included an analysis of race, prejudice, and power, they sometimes responded in a troublesome manner. I assume you're talking about white people. Why do you think they responded in that way?
Why do they respond to that definition in a troublesome manner?
Correct.
It's defensiveness. It's a lack of willingness to recognize how the systems of racism are benefiting individuals. My own experience working extensively within the Mennonite and Brethren in Christ community, there are also particular religious dynamics where individuals want to be seen as, white people want to be seen as being on the right side of history, but aren't aware of how they benefited from that history and aren't aware of themselves even as white people a lot of times. And whether that's an unconscious or a conscious reality, that's the stated reality for many white communities, which again I would assert is at the core of racism in this country, that white people assert they don't have an issue with racism, that racism no longer exists, and that ignorance, willful and otherwise, perpetuates the problem.
Just for comparison sake, I view racism as a crime, really the dominant form of crime on the planet right now. When I think about other criminal activities, other patterns of behavior that I observe amongst people who commit crimes, it's been my experience, someone who is a child rapist, they are uncomfortable talking about the children that they've raped. Has that been your experience?
I've not had this conversation, but yeah, sure.
Okay. Try and make it a bit more common. Other people who have committed theft, see one that's not as egregious. People who steal, that tends to be something that they're not proud about, that they're not going to go around bragging about stealing. Has that been your experience?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I view it as being very similar with racism with regards to white people's discomfort. I don't want to talk about my crimes. I particularly don't want the spotlight shined on me for my criminal activity. And I think it makes it a lot more difficult, just like with the theft or the child rapist, it makes it more difficult for me to continue practicing those crimes if I'm talking publicly about the fact that, oh yes, I'm a child rapist. Oh yes, I'm a thief. Oh yes, I'm a rapist. That makes it a lot more difficult for me to engage in those crimes. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, for sure. But I think there's a dynamic that's emerged, particularly among liberal whites, where it becomes fashionable to say, I am a racist. Let me tell you all the ways in which I'm a racist, and let me expose that as a way of dealing with their problem and erasing guilt. I don't think that's helpful. I think we do have to be clear about the way racism works, that we have been conditioned into being, into acting in racist ways as white people. But I don't think the litany is really helpful. I think what's helpful is the development of political action to overturn the systems that are in place to disrupt the racism as it occurs, rather than simply engaging in a litany of, yes, I'm racist. I haven't seen that as been as helpful.
Oh, I don't think that's helpful either, because most of the time what I see is not, I am a racist and these are the ways that I practice racism. What it frequently ends up being is exactly what you started off with at the beginning of the program. I can get Band-Aids, I'm not followed around the store, I can drive drunk and people don't get spotted, and I totally agree. I think that is worthless. I'm not interested in hearing 5 seconds of a white person do that. If white people were being honest and saying, I'm racist and these are the things that I do that prevent non-white people from getting hired. These are things that I do that prevent non-white people from getting housing. These are things that I do to blame things on other non-white coworkers on my job. If they were doing this sort of thing, that would be gold. That would be phenomenal. And it would help dislodge amongst non-white people the confusion where we think racist and it's got to be a Klansman. It's got to be Bull Connor. It's got to be somebody with a swastika tattoo, as opposed to thinking, oh, it could be, really, it is, in my opinion, Dr. Tobin Miller Shearer. That would be the picture of a racist. Really, anyway, Shirley Temple. That's not what people think of when they think of racist. And I think that would be much more accurate to describe the problem that we have. Most of the white people that are practicing racism, they don't have a Klan sheet in their house. That's not the way that it
absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
In fact, I would even ask this question, since we're in agreement on that. Have you seen any evidence that white people are going to voluntarily stop practicing racism?
Well, as you note, the evidence is far and few between. We have some historical examples we can trace. For example, there were efforts to organize white and black miners in the first part of the 20th century. Worker Brian Kelly talks about this in Alabama. I can name a few organizations. Roots of Justice, for example, is a multiracial anti-oppression coalition that's working with white people and people of color to overturn those systems in organized ways. We have some evidence, but I'm not going to suggest that it's widespread. I think it's difficult to develop. I engage in the work I do because I think it's possible that we do have examples of white people, say most famously someone like John Brown, who took those examples, but they're far and few between. And there's problems even in naming those sort of historical characters once we look at the full picture. Anyhow, there you go.
John Brown. Need my John Brown sound effect back. That, for me at least, that is it's I would laugh too. It's almost laughing to keep from crying. I find it extraordinarily embarrassing. Really, that is the evidence I would hope for any non-white person. That should be a monumental piece of evidence. It is 2014. It is 2014. And when we start talking about white people that are not racist, we have to go to the 19th century and find someone who has been dead for more than 150 years to evidence a white person who maybe wasn't racist. 2014, and we can't find a more recent example of a white person. And I would even reference Timothy Wise. He's been on that program, admitted racist. He just, very short response, no, I've really not seen any evidence that white people are willing voluntarily to stop practicing racism. And I think that's huge because I think that changes the whole timbre of the conversation. If you think white people are going to stop doing this, all they need to do is get a copy of Enter the River or hear a few of Dr. Shearer's lectures, read some of his material, Dr. Peggy McIntosh, Timothy Wise, some of these other white people who allege to be against racism, and that will solve this problem. You're going to end up in a very different spot as opposed to the people who think maybe these white people are not vested. Maybe they're really not interested in ending the system of racism and white supremacy, which benefits them in a myriad of ways. And I've seen no evidence from the white people who say that they're anti-racist. I've just seen no evidence that white people really are sincerely interested. And I would even just say, on a basic level, it's been my experience, most people don't want to give up power. When you've been in control of things, what's going to happen on the planet, most people don't want to give that up voluntarily. Do you think you would have to give some things up if the system of racism, white supremacy were not in place? Do you think you would have to forfeit some of the power that you have as a white man, director of African American Studies program at a prominent state university?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it would affect all of us in a myriad of ways. It would affect me as an individual. It would affect every white person, absolutely.
Okay. And you think a lot of white people, they would be upset about that, resistant to that, if they had to give up some of the power that they have if the system was no longer in place?
Oh, I've seen evidence of it where there have been institutions that I've been a part of that have attempted in very elementary ways to do that very thing. Absolutely.
What did they do specifically?
I'm sorry, can you say the question again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
In the times where you have seen this, the white people where they have resisted losing some of their power, what are some of the things that they did to actively resist?
Oh, yeah, threatened to not fund the organizations that were attempting to deal with racism and white privilege on, at least, as I said, an elementary level. Beginning to ostracize members of the white community who had been part of those organizing efforts. Redouble the identity of the organization around its whiteness by naming those individuals in power who were attempting to make the changes as troublemakers, out and out firings of individuals. We've seen all of those those patterns repeated too many times.
Wow. I have a question. Let's see. Are you familiar with Judge Richard Cebull?
I don't believe so.
I want to read a little bit of this since you said you're not familiar with him for our listeners. This, again, I said it at the beginning of the program, the importance of checking the news. I'm not saying you have to believe everything that you read in the paper. To the contrary, I'm of the opinion, if you think that a lot of the things that are reported in mainstream media, newspapers and what have you, on television news, if you think a lot of those things are distorted or they're not giving you full information, that's even more of a reason to pay attention to it so that you can investigate further and pick out things that are being left out, or if they're distorting things. In my view, the thing to do is not to ignore it. It's to pay attention to it so that you can refine your ability to scrutinize and see what they've left out. Going to the news, this is from the Great Falls Tribune. The title of this report, Cebull probe finds more emails. Hundreds are related to race, politics, and gender. And I want to just to kind of preface, I hope maybe it jogs your memory. That's good.
Yeah, sure did. Mm-hmm.
To preface this, I want to just, this is from, again, this is from your book where you said, I worked with many white people of European descent who had previously not spent much time thinking about racism. I want people to keep this in mind because I contend that that is false. It is so astronomically false that when I hear, and this is a pattern, this is not just you, I hear this from like 90% of the white people who talk about racism. Timothy Wise says this. I think it's in part of Dr. Peggy McIntosh's rhetoric, and I've told all of them that I think that they are deliberately deceiving non-white people and not being honest. I mean, it's astronomical malarkey, to put as much emphasis on it as I can, that white people don't think about racism. That is foolishness of the highest level, and it's dangerous. So this report, and this is from January 18th, 2014. The report reads, a review of 4 years' worth of emails from former Chief U.S. District Judge Richard Cebull's federal email account found hundreds of emails related to race, I say racism, politics, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and politically sensitive issues that were inappropriate for Judge Cebull to have sent from his federal email account. A national panel of federal judges released the 9th U.S. Circuit Court Judicial Council's March order late Friday that found Cebull in violation of numerous ethics codes. Cebull retired from the federal bench May 3, 2013, following a 9-month investigation that was launched after the Great Falls Tribune revealed he had forwarded a racist email from his courthouse chambers containing an offensive joke about President Barack Obama, suggesting that Obama's mother had sex with a dog. A special investigative committee later found that the majority of the personal emails Cebull sent from his federal email account were political in nature, end quote. Whether they were cast as jokes or serious commentary, the emails showed disdain and disrespect for liberal political leaders, the committee found. A significant number of emails were racism related. Whether cast as jokes or serious commentary, the emails showed disdain and disrespect for African Americans, Native Americans, and Hispanics, especially those who are not in the United States legally. A similarly significant number of emails related to religion and showed disdain for certain faiths. Approximately the same number of emails concerned women and or sexual topics and were disparaging of women. A few emails contained inappropriate jokes relating to sexual orientation. The 9th Circuit investigative panel also found that a large number of emails related to pending legislation or an issue that could come before the court, such as immigration, gun control, civil rights, racism related, healthcare, or environmental matters. Cebull, who was the Montana chief federal judge based in Billings, announced his resignation on a March 29 letter 2 weeks after the Judicial Council issued its first order in the investigation. I'm reading a little bit more just because I feel this is extremely important. We're talking about a judge here, and it's not just one person. I'm going to read a little bit more just because it's not just one person. This is a group effort. I always talk about how racism, white supremacy is a group effort amongst white people. You will see Voltron in effect, where one white person gets accused, suspected of practicing racism, and you will consistently see other white people pitching in to help out that white person. I'm continuing to read from their report. On May 13th, just days before the council's original order was supposed to become public, Ninth Circuit Chief Judge Alex Kaczynski issued a statement announcing that the order was moot because Cebull had resigned from office. In a decision filed Friday afternoon, the Committee on Judicial Conduct and Disability of the Judicial Conference of the United States found that the lower panel erred when it withheld its findings in the misconduct investigation. Arthur D. Hellman, scholar on judicial ethics from the University of Pittsburgh, said the National Conduct Committee's findings were a sharp reprimand on the way the Ninth Circuit Judicial Council handled the matter. The committee says that the council was required by law to make public its order finding extensive misconduct by Judge Cebull, and Judge Cebull's subsequent retirement did not change that obligation, Hellman said. Implicitly, the committee criticizes the Ninth Circuit Judicial Council for preparing and planning to publish a watered-down version of its initial March 15th order. The committee lists ways in which the latter order makes the misconduct appear much less serious. Hellman said the structure of the latter order makes clear the Ninth Circuit Judicial Council sought to downplay the seriousness of the misconduct. The later order, after describing the history of the controversy, starts with more than a page noting that the investigating committee found, and this is in quotes, no evidence of bias against non-white defendants and no anomalous patterns in Judge Cebull's handling of labor, civil rights, and prisoner civil rights cases, Hellman said. Only then does the order turn to the emails. On that point, as the Conduct Committee says, the latter order is brief and vague. Shahid Haik Harisath, I hope I'm saying his name correctly, a Helena immigration attorney who drafted one of the complaints filed against Cebull in 2012, called the Ninth Circuit's handling of the matter appalling. The decision reveals that the Ninth Circuit Judicial Council acted in appalling disregard of the Montana public's right to know about the conduct of its former chief judge, even though he waived his own confidentiality. I will stop there. They do go on to specifically say that they find it preposterous that this panel could conclude that Judge Cebull had no prejudice thinking when he served or rendered any sort of finding, sentencing against non-whites who came to his courtroom. They found that absurd, as do I. I'll go back to your statement, given what you just read. I hope that was clear for folks who were listening in. You said, I worked with many people of European descent who had not previously spent much time thinking about racism. What I just read, it sounds to me like white people spend an inordinate amount of time thinking, talking, joking about racism, white supremacy. Your response?
Well, I think the most surprising thing about the article you read is the fact that it got any coverage at all. I'm going to make no defense of the prevalence of the kind of racist jokes that you identify. My experience has been that when I bring this up and I talk about racism, maybe it would be helpful for me to identify the main paradigm shifts I think white people have to go through. Because my experience has been that white folks talk about racism in terms of jokes, which is absolutely problematic, but they have no concept of what racism is a system. And if they think they need to do anything at all, it's to stop telling jokes, and it stops there. It's not that we shouldn't stop telling jokes. That has to be interrupted. That has to be stopped. The kind of behaviors you just described are are absolutely racist. You have to acknowledge that, and the kind of support you identify is very clear. But the confusion among the white people I engage with is they think that that's all there is it's just racist jokes. I think the paradigm shifts I referred to, I think white people, first of all, have to recognize that racism is not just a thing of the past. It continues today, and for many white folks, that's a pretty big leap. The second one is that racism has the effect of giving white privilege and power to white people. And the third paradigm shift is that receipt shapes us in insidious ways, making it so that we don't acknowledge our own racism, so that we're not even aware of it when we're doing it a lot of times. Have I responded to your question?
You have, but I would say that is more of the same, in my view, deliberate racism, I suspect, where white people, exactly as they just said in that report, vague, watered down. I would say just that report. We're not talking about some Joe Schmo on the street. This is a judge here who's engaged in this behavior. They said hundreds of emails. And I think just as importantly, I suspect it was a white panel. Generally, it's been my experience when they have some sort of investigation, particularly if it's a powerful white person, even a judge who's retired. I suspect this panel consisted of other white people, maybe all white
fair
people.
Assumption.
Fair. It's that, in my opinion, is not white people not understanding that this is a system. That, in my opinion, is not. It's almost it is, in my view. It's a refutation of everything that you just said. And I feel like, in my view, just that alone, when I ask a white person, and you're a white person who alleges to be anti-racist, you said you've done 20 years of experience facilitating workshops, you've written books, 1994 publication, your book is 20 years old now, where you've been writing and talking about this. It is, I can't even say that it is surprising. I would say a response like that, for me, it further solidifies my belief, my conclusion, that white people have no interest in desisting with the practice of racism. And I would look at individuals like yourself who allege to be against racism. You all should be subjected to the most scrutiny. And the fact that you would have a response like that white people don't understand racism as a system. Clearly, the white people in that council who were investigating Judge Cebull, that is the system right there. That is exactly what I'm talking about when I give my definition, when they water down a report and make it vague and downplay the seriousness of the racist conduct of this judge who is responsible for people's lives that are coming before him. This right there, that in my view, that's not confusion. That's not I don't understand. That's not ignorance. That is the practice. That is really, I understand my duty as a white person, how we're supposed to function. We are supposed to look out for this white person, Judge Cebull. We are supposed to look out and maintain the system of white supremacy. That, I mean, just in my view, looking at an act that is that blatant and not being, or refusing, in my view, refusing to call it what it is, that right there is just to continue. You, in my view, what you just did, it is exactly what that panel did with Judge Cebull in making racism, downplaying the seriousness of it, downplaying how seriously devoted and committed white people are to the practice of racism, watering it down so that it's not clear, making it very vague so that non-white people really don't understand what it is that white people are doing and how committed they are to this. Do you want to respond?
I think that's a helpful critique. Thank you.
I would just say I take that as deliberate act of racism, white supremacy, and I've seen this. I would tell anybody, if you're a new listener to the program, I've seen this too many times. This is standard operating procedure for a pretty major case, and even to your point about this being covered at all, I suspect most people don't know about this. I suspect if you mentioned Judge Cebull's name, and do people know about him? Have people heard about him? I suspect most people probably don't. Even if you went in the state of Montana, I suspect a lot of people would not be familiar with this case. Oh, am I being heard?
I'm sorry. You went out. I couldn't. The line dropped. Now you're back.
Okay.
Go ahead.
What I was saying, your point about this case, you being surprised that it was reported at all. I suspect that this did not get very much coverage. I suspect if you went out and asked some of the biggest stories over the past month or so, Richard Sherman would pop up, the Super Bowl would pop up, Justin Bieber being arrested would pop up, the debt ceiling and then passing that would pop up. Judge Cebull in Montana and these hundreds of racist emails about President Obama and how this might have affected the way that he carried out his job in terms of adjudicating non-white people who came through his courtroom. I suspect that didn't come through, especially even the further part about this panel of what I suspect is mostly white people and them deliberately watering down, downplaying the seriousness of these racist offenses. I suspect that didn't come through at all. It's not like I think most of the people, in fact, I'll ask people that call in, if folks have questions, I'll ask before you all get to your questions and what have you. If you could share, did you know about this? Had you heard anything about this? Did this come to your attention? Because I think this is pretty important. We'll hit the phone line and see if people have questions for Dr. Shearer. Before you get to your question, just let us know. Had you heard about this? Did you know anything about this incident? And do you think this is important? Lashes, you should be on the line. Before we get to your question, did you know about what happened with former Judge Cebull? Oh, her line dropped out. I guess just dial back in if you have a question, what have you. The person that dialed in, 5640. Before you get to your question, did you know about this incident with Judge Cebull in Montana?
No, I wasn't aware of that at all.
Okay. Do you think that's what I read? If you understood the report, do you think that's an important event that more people should know about?
Absolutely, yes, definitely.
Okay. Go ahead. You can proceed with your questions.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Welcome to the guest, Dr. Shearer.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. I appreciate your transparency and honesty. And when I ask this question, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I'm just asking because it would be just a learning tool for me. Hopefully your reply. I just wanted to ask you. You mentioned that at some point in your past, you found it difficult to work directly under a black man, as your direct supervisor. And I just wanted to ask you, if you could give specific examples of like the ways that you reacted, just in your discomfort, with your position.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
Good
you,
question.
sir.
A couple of things I can remember. My wife and I were live-in hosts to the situation was a former motel. There were individual units, and the leader of the organization, whose supervision I was under, would invite ex-offenders and homeless folks to live in those other units, and my wife and I lived in one of them. And the expectation is if you were living in here, you took part in weekly meetings. I have very clear memories of the organization's leader running a meeting that was relaxed. People were enjoying it. He was getting folks to talk. And then one week he's gone, I come in and lead a meeting with agenda points, time frames. No one talks to me. It's an entirely different dynamic. And even though I was aware that it was not working for me, I wasn't ready to acknowledge that Don knew much more about what was going on than I did. I'd been socialized to view my ways of running meetings as superior, as the one right way, and I was not ready to recognize that Don's way of running the meeting was far better than mine. That's one specific thing I can remember. There are others.
Oh, okay.
Did I answer your question?
You. But I was also trying to ask, for example, did you find yourself questioning his authority, maybe not so much talking back to him as the employee, but I was just trying to get at just other practical examples where you might have. I don't know how to explain it, but
no. I understand what you're saying, but thank you. As I recall, I didn't challenge him in public. I think that probably just had as much to do with my personality style as anything. But I think an observer at the time might have seen me sending nonverbal messages in terms of fidgeting in my chair when Don was in charge of a meeting, or giving other more subtle indications that I was not pleased with what he was doing. I think that probably is the way it was expressed, rather than me challenging his leadership in public.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's very helpful. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your question.
And then my last question.
Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. And then my last question is: now you said you're head of the African American Studies Department at a local university.
At a what university?
Oh, at a local university.
Oh, yeah, University of Montana. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So, do you have black students there, or are most of your students primarily white or non-black?
University of Montana's racial demographics are overwhelmingly white. There's been a historic African-American student body population that since about 1968, thereabouts, has hovered between 100 and 200 raw numbers. The percentage obviously has dropped as the larger student body has increased. The African American Studies program here at the University of Montana was founded in 1968 by Ulysses Doss. I could go into the history of that, but so there is a small African American population here on campus. Yes.
Okay, and where is this building, Montana?
We're in Missoula, Montana.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you again.
Yeah, sure.
Appreciate the questions. I'd encourage other listeners, please do not wait until the last minute to get your questions in for Dr. Shearer. Lashes should have dialed back in. Before you get to your questions, just want to make sure, did you know anything about former retired Judge Cebull? The report that was read, if you were able to hear it before your line got disconnected. Lashes, your line should be open.
No, I was not aware of the judge response at all.
Okay. And do you think that's something significant? That should be something that should have gotten national attention?
Yeah.
Okay. Proceed.
I have a question for your guest. Good evening. I have a question in regards to when white people discuss racism, white supremacy in a public sphere. There's always the term white guilt that comes up. I want to know, from your perspective, is the term white guilt, or I should say guilt in particular, is the definition of guilt the true definition of guilt, which you will find in the dictionary, or is guilt a code word for we white people do not want to be exposed for practicing racism, white supremacy?
Yeah.
I just said yeah. Yeah. Uh-oh.
Did you want to say something? No, I thought Gus was saying something. No. Oh, okay, yeah. Thanks for your question.
Sure.
I think that the liberal white guilt that gets named in those settings is not the guilt that leads ultimately to, I'll use a religious term here, atonement and righting the wrong. Most of the times, in my experience, that white guilt is a sentiment of paralyzing inaction that doesn't lead to collective change in behavior.
Copy. Because sometimes when I hear the term white guilt used, it's used in a dismissive tone against the non-white person who is either bringing up a particular issue pertaining to racism, white supremacy. So if I always view the term guilt when applied to white guilt as a code word for, hey, we white people don't want to be exposed for practicing racism, white supremacy at any given moment, whether past, present, or future.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Thank you.
Okay. And my next question was regards to your story about how you felt that you did not adhere to your black supervisor or boss at the time of your employment. Mm-hmm. I want to know what sense or feeling did you have that made you uncomfortable in adhering to your boss's, rules or regulation at that time?
I think at times I felt frustrated. To describe the particular emotions, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I felt I felt frustrated. I felt I'm guessing I felt envious at points that I was not the one in control. I felt confusion over it. This was not who I thought I was. And I also felt embarrassed in those moments when I was most honest with myself.
What part in particular was confusing for you?
The confusion resulted around, again, my self-identity as someone who did not act in racist ways, and the realization that I was, in fact, doing so.
Copy. Got it. Okay. I think that would be all. Now, in terms of, I heard the Shirley Temple reference earlier at the top of the program being referenced. Do you specialize in the history of Shirley Temple, how she was used in race films back in the day? And
no, I do not. I acknowledge I have very limited expertise in that area.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
The person that dialed in 4223, again, before you get to your questions, if you had heard of Judge Cebull, retired Judge Cebull, did you know about that case before today?
Hello to all the callers and Gus and the guest. Yes, only because I am newly becoming a little bit less confused about racism, white supremacy, and I am tuned in always to linking to the C.O.W.S Facebook page. So yeah, I did hear about that, and I thought it was. I really don't have any words for it. I guess the only thing that could come to mind would be absurd, racist, of course, and just horrible. So I did hear about it.
Right on. Proceed.
Okay, I had the question for, and please forgive me, the guest. Could you please repeat your name once more?
Yeah, my name is Tobin Miller Shearer.
Okay, thank you. And you are the you're head of the African American Studies at University of Montana. You said, right?
That's correct.
I heard you give a little bit of history. You said you wanted to just give a little bit of history about when it was founded or created, 1968. What was the objective for creating that in
yeah.
I guess you said it was majority white?
Yes.
University. What was the objective?
Dr. Doss came to this campus somewhat serendipitously. He had been working in Chicago as part of civil rights activity and efforts in that city. Ended up here through a variety of circumstances, was invited by the president at that time to begin offering both courses in African American studies, and over time, Dr. Doss chose to open those up to the larger community. And as one of my colleagues who's done some of the history on this tells the story, Dr. Doss simply walked into his office one day and declared himself the director of the then existent African American Studies program. He started it on his own initiative at that point. That's the story I know to tell.
Well, the objective was to inform other white people about African Americans, or what? I'm sorry, I didn't even begin.
Dr. Doss, who is African American himself articulates it more in terms of wanting to present the history of the African American community and its present reality to both the white local community and the African American students on campus. That's the history I know, as I've heard him tell it.
Okay, and one last question. How is it that you became the head of African American Studies?
Yeah, the job was open here. I had worked, as I mentioned, within this field, and I decided I would apply after talking with African Americans who held me accountable for the work I was doing. Over time, I was hired. I'm the first white person who's been in this particular position. It's a position that inherently brings tension with it. I try to acknowledge that before every class I teach with my students. And the one positive dynamic that we could discuss would be that I'm able to demonstrate that African American history is something that everyone should know. It's not a history that only one group should know. But obviously there are tensions that come with that, being a white man that's heading up an African American Studies program. We're very small. It's me. I'm the only full-time faculty member. There's a half-time faculty member who works with us, and then we have affiliated faculty from other departments.
Okay, thank you for answering my questions, and thank you, Gus.
Yeah, thank you.
For other folks, if you all have questions, again, do not wait until the last minute. The number to dial, 760-569-7676. The code is 564-943#. Press star 6 if you have a question for Dr. Tobin Miller Shearer. Going back, we'll nab our other question. Caller, I think this is Tapello 3358. Did you have a question for Dr. Shearer?
Greetings.
Greetings. Oh, wait a minute, Bob. Before we get to your question, did you know about Judge Cebull?
Are you talking to me or?
Yes, sir. Talking to you.
I had just tuned in, and I really have no idea what's going on right now. I just want to ask a quick question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
No, I do not know about Judge. You said Tobin?
Cebull, Cebull. He's a retired district judge, chief U.S. district judge in Montana. He's retired now.
Oh, no.
Okay.
What about it?
He sent, the short of it, he sent hundreds of emails, many of them racist jokes about President Obama and disparaging of black people. He resigned last year, and what I suspect is a panel of probably mostly and or all white people. They made an investigation and they reported their findings, and it turns out that people looked at this panel and they, to use their words, they drastically watered down and downplayed the seriousness in terms of the volume of these emails and how inappropriate, racist they were, disparaging of many groups of people, black people, non-white people, that they watered down the report and made it very vague in terms of how serious these accusations were and not sharing that information with the public. This just was released in January.
This was a judge, right?
Correct.
I think I remember us talking about that when he did it.
Oh, okay.
But this is a follow up. Okay, because we got new information about what went down. Okay, I'm willing to read that.
Okay, go ahead with your question, sir.
He's an African American, or should I say, a history professor, correct?
He's director of the African American Studies Department at the University of Montana.
Okay. Now, I've been having a problem trying to understand this. The Amistad Rebellion. Why did the Africans on the Amistad, how come they can get a trial for their nationality or their rights, and yet the Africans in South Carolina couldn't even get heard, but yet they knew where they were from, they knew their names. What's the difference?
Yeah, I know the Amistad case. I'm not sure about the South Carolina case you're referring to. In the case of the Amistad case, no, sure, go ahead.
Just any African slave that knew where they were from, that knew that they were from Angola, supposedly. Any Africans that came in to South Carolina. I'm wondering if the Amistad people could get their rights heard in a quote-unquote court of law, who I do not know who was really governing that court of law. Was it England? Was it so-called United States? Who was really governing that, and how come the Amistad Africans could get their voices heard, but none of the slaves in South Carolina, Virginia, Plantation, none of these places could get their voices heard? I want to know, why is that?
Right. Long story short, in the Amistad case, it was able, the descendants were able to leverage some particular points of law around the international slave trade, and the uncertain status of the members of the Amistad ship who rebelled. The status had been determined of, I assume in the cases in the South, of the enslaved Africans who were, the status had been determined. So it had to do on finer points of legal distinction, although we have to be clear, this is an overall racist system of slavery that was not at all interested in freeing any Africans who had been enslaved. We know the Amistad case because I think in many instances it's one of those feel-good stories where Hollywood, who makes the movie, producers in Hollywood, want to say, well, here's an instance where there was space being opened up for consideration of enslaved Africans' freedom. But it's the exception that proves the overwhelming reality of racism at that point in the production and maintenance of slavery in this country.
Now, that's exactly what I'm talking about. It's a system of indentured servitude. But what I'm trying to understand is were they under contract? Was there a difference in contracts going on?
Yeah, it had to do...
That's the reason why the South Carolina people could not go to court, because they were under contract, and then they were hoodwinked because they could not read or write, or got the misunderstanding or somehow with the contract. And the Amistad people found out that they were being hoodwinked while they were on the water. Was it a contract issue?
Yeah, it had to do with legal status in the respective situations, yes.
So when you say legal status, exactly what do you mean by status?
Were they free or enslaved, and who had the quote-unquote rights of sale? I mean, it was this racist system that's treating humans as property, and there were legal codes that were built up to be sure that was protecting the so-called property of the white slave owners. And it was fine legal points of distinction that were connected to the sale of Africans internationally, the international slave trade, and what was happening. So it was in that space in the transfer between the international owners and being on U.S. soil. So yeah, it had to do with where the actual rebellion took place and how that put it in
maritime law.
Yeah,
we're talking
it
about
had to do with those kind of
maritime law, and that's the difference.
Yes, yes.
So in other words, the United States had no jurisdiction.
It was a question of jurisdiction, exactly.
Themselves on the water.
Yeah, those were the points of debate. Absolutely.
Okay. So who was governing the sea?
Yeah, and those are the questions that were being debated at the time.
Okay, well, at the time, who was in control of the sea? Was it England or was it Moors?
Well, of course, it was complex, and there was. I would have to defer to those who've studied this at greater length, but my understanding is that there was no one authority over the sea, but it had to do when you came into U.S. territory or you came under U.S. authority, and the laws that governed that. I don't have the details about how the court cases progressed, but I do know it was questions of the authority to determine who was slave and who was free. International law against American jurisprudence.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have more details than that. My apologies.
No worries. I'll have more questions later on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The person that dialed in on the free HD line, before we get to your question, did you know about the Richard Cebull, former Judge Richard Cebull case?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I heard about it, unfortunately. And I think it was important to go out internationally, and so people can. Yeah, I thought it was important. I think it should have been went out internationally.
I know. Proceed with your question, sir.
Greetings to the guests. I was wondering if you can recall the reason why I asked this question. You were saying, like, you know, African American history is open or to, you know, other people other than you know, just African Americans. Can you recall any of your students after you know, like coming up to you and expressing some type of epiphany or a change of mind, or you know, where they felt that they had to express that to you? Did that happen? And if so, anything that comes to mind?
Oh yeah, one of the great joys of getting to be a teacher is exactly the kind of conversations you note. You're asking for those aha moments, correct? And what they look like among my student body?
Yeah, you know, what you can remember that of note, yeah.
Yeah. Couple aha moments that I think have consistently come up when we talk about the history of the idea of race itself and how that's been put in place deliberately over time to ensure that white people receive power and privilege and people of color are oppressed. That whole history of the idea of race and how it emerged in a time when colonialism was being exported around the globe, and how it became insidiously connected with pseudoscientific ideas of biology and connected to the legal system, as Jordan Winthrop reminds us. I get a lot of ahas going around the room on that particular exploration of history. When we talk, for example, about the robust pursuit of civil rights that took place during the progressive movement in the 1930s and into the 1940s, that Glenda Elizabeth Gilmore and others have explored, and compared that to the more anemic pursuit of civil rights during the 50s and 60s, that's another aha moment for a lot of my students, recognizing that actually the civil rights movement that is most popularly celebrated in this country was a pale reflection of the deeper economic and systemic analysis that was critiquing the kind of things we've been talking about this evening already in the 1930s and the 1940s. Martha Biondi's work on the early roots of the civil rights movement in New York City is another great example of that. When we discuss those sorts of things, students get all kind of aha moments pretty consistently. When I talk about the development of Jim Crow in the end of the 18th century into the beginning of the 19th century, and how, again, that didn't just appear from nowhere. It was deliberately put in place in order to maintain white superiority in the South and throughout the North. That's an aha moment. Or when I talk about the Supreme Court decision around Plessy versus Ferguson, and note that there were actually only, I think I have this right, 2 northern justices, the rest were southern justices, and it was actually, the dissenting voices came from a southern judge. No, I'm sorry, it's the other way around. There was a majority northern court, and it was one of the dissenting voices to Plessy versus Ferguson, which legalized segregation in this country, was a southerner. So actually that decision, if we look at it solely in the context of the Supreme Court ruling, was a northern decision to maintain and legalize segregation. It wasn't a southern decision, and that opens up students' eyes many times. Those I can name, but I'll stop there.
I have another question, but I was just wondering, after these aha moments, especially like, okay, with the concept of race, what's after the aha moment? Like, have you had any students after the aha moment say, I mean, what's after that? I mean, have any of them expressed like race? I mean, are they saying like, you know what, this whole, I mean, after the aha, have you heard anything that maybe was interesting, or something that you didn't expect after the aha?
Sort of what they did with that awareness?
Right. Or expressed to you that they would like to change in their own vocabulary or actions and things like that?
Absolutely changes in vocabulary. I don't know as many stories of what has come from that in their individual lives. There's some
concepts that they've expressed that really sounded like something new or progressive or
I can remember one student who basically slept his way through taking my Introduction to African American Studies class one year, came back the next year and he finally decided he was going to be a college student, and really got excited about what was going on. He's now picked up the minor here and is talking to members in his dorm about the problems of racism in our country. I guess that's something that's come through, and he does it in bold ways that he gets pushback for. So that would be one example I can think of.
Are you shocked, even with the work that you've done in these? You said it's like 20 years or so.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are you shocked and maybe that of the lack of protest and just the outcry, and even the fact that you don't really know exactly what came after these aha moments?
Sure.
Like, what are you? I'm just wondering. What are you shocked by that, and then what do you account for this apathy? This work that's supposed to be done. It doesn't seem like anything. It's just, I don't know. I'm just wondering if you understood my question.
Yeah. So I guess I have two responses. Am I shocked? My study of U.S. history would have to leave me saying no. These patterns of racism have been consistent over time, and that we're still having a hard time dealing with it. I can't say I'm shocked by that. Am I disappointed that there isn't a movement right now? Yes. At the same time, I mean, we can trace, say just for instance, starting with Martin Delaney in the Civil War period, or moving forward to Marcus Garvey in the 1920s, and after that looking at A. Philip Randolph in the 1940s, and then what we associate with the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, and the first part in the latter half of the 1950s. We've had these ebbs and flows of movements that have emerged in very important ways despite this racist system, and there have been people all along trying to bring those out, even when we have these periods of what we might call visible quiescence, where there's not that kind of activism on a national scale. And if we don't know all the social and historical forces that come together for those movements to emerge, we don't understand why that happens sometimes and why it doesn't happen other times. I'm hopeful that it will happen again. I wish I knew exactly how to bring that about, but I don't.
I think possibly the way these conversations are taking place, I think that might be a big part of it. But how many books did you read last year? And could you give us a few titles that were of note and most interesting?
Yeah, like a number of books I read last year. Oh gosh, I actually keep a record of it. It's probably, I don't know, 100 or so probably in the last year, maybe a bit more than that. I would say one of the most interesting books I've read recently would be The Last Segregated Hour by Stephen Haynes, which was a history of the Memphis Kneelings and the campaign for Southern Church desegregation. Found a very helpful history of, again, the way the white church responded to calls for change on their very doorstep. There's one I could list more if that'd be helpful.
Are you interested, Gus?
Sure. Let's hear a few.
Some more? Let's see.
If you got books specifically written by white authors, that would be grand. White authors where they are really being honest, like no sugarcoating it, no silliness, pussyfooting, like being as honest as possible about racism from some white authors, that would be great.
There are white authors included in the book edited by Russell Hawkins and Philip Luke Cintieri, Christians and the Color Line, Race and Religion After the Book Divided by Faith. I found that to be pretty much as you're describing, a very forthright examination. Again, I look at race and religion a lot, of what that has looked like over time. I'm just looking at my list here of books that I've read recently. There's a book, Mississippi Praying, that by Carolyn DuPont, the subtitle of Southern White Evangelicals in the Civil Rights Movement, 1945 to 1975, which I think is one of the most forthright texts I've seen in a long time. This is a little bit different than the one I'd named earlier, talking about, again, the Southern White Evangelical resistance to even the idea of racial integration and the overt actions they took to maintain that. Much of the other books I've been reading have been talking about the role of prayer, public prayer in the Civil Rights Movement, and looking at mimetic theory that wouldn't relate to this as directly. I hope that's helpful. And I'm sorry, but I'll have to note that I've got another commitment right after this that I told I'd be able to get to with finishing at 8 o'clock. So I don't want to be rude, but I will have to end our conversation here in the next minute or so.
Is it possible to get one more question in before you exit?
Sure, let's do one more. That would be fine.
Okay. 0748, did you have a question for Dr. Shearer?
Yes. Greetings to everyone, the host and the guests. There was, I think, for the advertisement for this broadcast, there was a term in quotes called interracial congregation. Am I correct?
Yes, Dr. Shearer does use that term in describing some of his research. He just talked about studying racism and religion, interracial congregations, I think in the context of people, quote unquote, worshiping together, non-white and white people worshiping together.
That's correct.
Okay. My question would be to you, Doctor, what does a congregation look like before it becomes the interracial congregation you speak of? What does a congregation look like to you before it becomes the interracial congregation you speak of? And that's my question.
Sure. I've studied both those congregations that started out white and due to shifting demographics of the communities in which they were located became, to use the term, interracial in their worshiping congregation composition. I have also studied congregations, there have been far fewer of these, who deliberately set out to bring white people and people of color together as a worshiping body, as their raison d'etre, and in a few instances of congregations that white people have joined that were predominantly African American or Latino, or though again in those instances those are much smaller, there's much smaller sample size. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Right on. We will make sure Dr. Shearer can get his previous engagement. His book, again, Enter the River, 1994, all about racism and reconciliation. Appreciate folks with their questions, and thank you to Dr. Shearer sharing a bit of your Thursday evening. Appreciated the dialogue. Hope that we can have you back on the program in the future to get some more information. I'm going to check out some of the titles that you shared with us as well.
Well, thanks for your time and for your questions. I'm always glad to have a rigorous discussion over these essential topics. Thanks for inviting me.
For sure. Take good care, and we'll speak with you soon, Dr. Shearer.
Okay. All right. Thanks again.
Evening. Context of White Supremacy. We'll check. I know there are a couple other people who had hands up. I did say, don't wait till the end. See, it's like 4 people who had hands up. I say that all the time. Don't wait till the end. Don't wait till the last minute. Get your question in. I will get the folks who dialed in who had hands up. I'll get your mic so you can share if you had questions that you wanted to share. Maybe we can get them back on the program in the future. Just before I get there, I'm reminded, and it's not a critique. It's not a, I'm angry and, As I've said consistently, if you like the program, so what? If you don't like the program, so what? Replace white supremacy with justice. I go back just consistently hearing the non-white people who said that they are uncomfortable when we have white guests on the program, because I've heard it so many times over the 5 years. I'd forgotten all about it. We are about a week away from our 5-year anniversary of the program being back on the air since February 2009. And I have to say, I would say, number one, anyone who has felt uncomfortable or uptight or nervous just listening to a phone conversation, that is interesting. That, I think is fascinating in and of itself. What is it exactly that makes you uncomfortable when we have white people on the program? That would be number one. The people who said, they feel like the white people are being ambushed, or because I hear that's the vocabulary. Those are the terms that I hear, that they're being ambushed, or do we always have to be out for blood? That sort of thing. Just that terminology. I don't think Dr. Shearer, I don't think he left us to get medical attention. I don't think he was going to a hospital. I don't think he was suffering. I don't think he's going to need stitches or an ice pack. I don't think he's going to have any bruises. I don't think he's in danger of losing his position as director of African American Studies at the University of Montana. I don't think his book sales are going to be negatively impacted as a result of this program. I think it just, and this is my conclusion, I could be in error. I think one aspect of our victimization, we have been conditioned to not challenge white people, to not disagree with white people, all the way back to Shirley Temple. We have been conditioned to smile and agree, even when we know what they're saying is foolishness, even when we don't agree with what they're saying. That's the way we've been conditioned. That is how people who are victims of terrorism, that's how they have been trained and conditioned to respond. And I think that impacts all of us to varying degrees, and I hope that that's something that we can just be mindful of. It's a part of racism, white supremacy. I think it's that same feeling. Any black person in the world who has been stopped by enforcement officials, woof, man, this could go. I think that happens frequently when we're talking with white people about racism. Don't want to upset this white person. Don't want to anger this white person. I could get in trouble if I upset these white people. I think that happens on a regular basis. Just be mindful of that. I always enjoy having white people on the program. It's not really even about, quote unquote, ambushing them or attacking them. Really, it's just the exchange where we were talking about Judge Cebull. When the foolishness is coming out, I mean, if it was really just keeping it real, it would be like, you are the lying piece of crap. I can't believe you're coming here and say all this fool. That's really what it would sound like. I'm really trying to be calm and professional in responding to someone who, in my view, is practicing racism. When they give responses talking about Judge Cebull and sit up and tell you to your face straight, no laughter, that white people don't talk about racism, it is so astronomically offensive and deceptive that, I mean, that is worthy of being ambushed. That's worthy of being put in a headlock. That's worthy of being smacked upside the head. For a white person to say that when they know they're lying. He just said his family is sitting around putting on racist skits, and then you come back and put in a book and say that white people don't talk about racism. It is astronomically offensive when white people do this. So that's just want to make sure I get that out. Folks have any comments on what they heard during the broadcast, if anything stuck out as interesting or what have you, that would be grand. I'll get the folks who dialed in who didn't get an opportunity to share so that you can at least get your question in, even though our guest is no longer with us, or if you just had a comment that you wanted to make, an observation. Everybody who dialed in, who had a hand up, who did not get to share, your line should be open. I think I'm missing one person. Okay, everybody who dialed in, who had a hand up, who did not get to ask a question, your line should be open. I don't know how you want to divvy up the ordering or what have you, but the folks who dialed in, if you all want to share your question or comment, feel free.
Can it be heard?
Is this Tapello?
Yes, yes.
Okay, let's hang tight. Make sure we get the people who did not get to ask their questions first.
Not a problem. Greetings, everyone.
Yes, sir. Caller in Florida, we can hear you.
Yes, sir. I think the only reason why I didn't get nauseous by our guest was because of my expectations. I don't expect anything different from a white person. I listened for about I guess an hour, and it reminded me of an interview that Mr. Fuller just had, I think, on the 14th of last month, about refined racism, white supremacy. And he was saying that he's right around white people as he would lecture, and that said that they are counter-racist, and he doesn't say anything to them. So it's not my place to say anything to them, because as I hear you mention all the time, Gus, that white people are knowledgeable about racism. What can we share with them as far as some valuable information for them to know about racism? They are the proprietors of the system of racism, white supremacy themselves. And he made a critique about how white people, similar to the guests, either they like to spend time around non-white people, and in a lot of cases non-white black people, or like your guest, he is something that can be flattering to non-white people by having a job, whereas he's the professor of African American studies, and I don't know where that provides any serious benefit to ending the system of racist white supremacy as soon as possible. I don't see where that factors in at all. I don't think he has any thoughts of his life is in danger on a daily basis from white people seeking to kill him for whatever his activities are at all. Those are some of the things that I would have questioned him on and challenged him on. Mr. Fuller was saying, I have it, but I'm not going to mess up your program by asking to play it. It's about 30 seconds long on what Mr. Fuller had to say about the subject. But nevertheless, from the standpoint of white people who pretend that they are counter-racist, but yet they don't challenge white people at all. In other words, what about that white neighbor that cracks these racist jokes, or the white person that's in charge of some sort of economic system, some sort of the banking system and whatnot? Challenge them verbally as well as physically, or some sort of unifying effort with others, like some of the other guests that you have had on the program that said that they are quote unquote counter racist. What are they doing against white people directly to challenge, or sharing with us on how white people, in the presence of non-white people, can practice racism? Share with us on how that can be neutralized. And I don't hear anything on that nature coming from white people that I asked with my own personal scientific studies, or the people that you have on the program. And I have heard you challenge them in the same way. And it's like crickets. You hear crickets in the background. They're the dumbest people in the world when it comes to that. Everything else, they can share with us about the many different non-white black people who have risked their lives in failed attempts to solve the problem. They can share with us all that information, but they can share with us nothing, in my opinion, of significance that we would need in order to destroy the ability of white people harming non-white people, the atmosphere, all living things within the known universe. It's nothing. It's like crickets. And I'll just let it go at that if someone else can share in.
Any of the other callers who did not get a chance to question Dr. Shearer, your line should be open.
Well, I called in an hour late, but I was going to ask him, why are white people who claim to have information from non-white people are totally dedicated to keeping us confused, whether it's subconsciously or unconsciously. That's all.
Good question. Any other folks on the line who did not get to question Dr. Shearer? Anyone else with us? I thought it was 4 people, at least, or anybody else on the line who did not get to question Dr. Shearer? Okay, I will assume either they are just listening or hanging out. Oh, it seems like one person, their line. The other person, line should be open. Maybe they're just listening. Everybody who dialed in, who had a hand up, your line should be. Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, I guess my line is open.
I was paying attention to the question that you asked him about how do white people participate in system of white supremacy, and I think that was a very, very helpful part of the program, and I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it because I want to make sure I take notes and actually draw that list down because I think that was just very revealing how he just laid it out like that. And it's like you said, like we always said, white people are not ignorant of racism, white supremacy, because the way he just spit it out, it was like, yeah, we doing this, yeah. And he just told us like it was nothing. So I mean, that's just, I mean, if people are still confused about what's going on after something like that, then I mean, just don't want to know. So that's how I look at it.
I would. I'm sorry. I would just submit quickly that that case with U.S. District Judge Richard Cebull, I was so happy because I was trying to think of incidents in Montana because I feel like that's such a wacky spot. I don't think we have any. If anybody who listens to the cows is in Montana, my bad. But I feel like that's such a wacky area. Like I've been to Montana once, and that's only because of where I live now. But and I was thinking I can't even, like, normally if you tell me like a state or a city even, I can pretty quickly think of, some incidents of racism to tie in. And I was like, Montana, that's so off the map. I can't think of anything related to that. So I was looking, and I was looking for the incident with the judge just to refute what he said in his book about white people don't talk about racism. And I was just, I mean, that is foolishness of the highest order. And so I went to that because this not only there's the judge making all these racist jokes, that would be one, but then this panel that gets together and protects the judge. Oh, we'll make sure that we don't reveal as much information about how serious and pervasive this was and the impact on non-white people who came through his courtroom. That was the only reason that I looked for it. And then when I found that it was, oh my goodness, this was in Montana, Eureka. Bam, that's an easy one. And that's current. That's something that this was just updated last month, just within the last 30 days. Bang, that's something you can easily reference. Any white person, he said he knew about this incident. Bang, example right there of how racism, white supremacy is practiced. This is a judge. When we talk about disproportionate sentences and black people getting the death penalty and all the other antics that happen in the courtroom, bang, here you go. And President Obama. I mean, bing, bing, bing. I mean, there's so many aspects of racism, white supremacy in this one case, and he doesn't even mention it. I feel like that's what I mean. White people, they're not ignorant. They're not confused. They just make an effort confusing non-white people to give the impression that they are not about practicing, continuing the system of white supremacy when every shred of evidence contradicts that. I mean, it's obvious. I don't even think he had a reply when he gave his little goofy response about how white people, they're confused and they don't understand it as a system. In responding to this report, I think his response was another one that is worthy of a smack upside the head, to be that ridiculous, and how you would respond to something that is so blatant and obvious, in my opinion. But I will mute there.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I can hear you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Is it all right to give a incident of workplace racism?
Oh, okay. Right on.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Okay. Well, I was at work, and this white coworker came up to me and said that a black guy said that his girlfriend was racist because she doesn't want to go with black men. And I told him that whoever you want to go with, that's that's your personal choice. Because most people are more comfortable with people that look like them. But I told him that I think all of y'all are racist, not only your girlfriend but you yourself. And he responded, "Oh no, I'm not racist. I do this. And I got a black friend. I mean, the same old cliche mess." I said, I can prove that you're a racist
because when we were talking about religion, I told you that everything that Christianity got, they stole it from Egyptians. You said that that wasn't true because it was a black author. But the book that I gave you as a resource was the Smith's Bible Dictionary, and that's written by a white bishop. And he gave me the stupidest look, and he couldn't say anything. And then he later on, he said, excuse my language, but this is what he said. He said, fuck research. And I told him that's the response that I'd expect from people like him. I said, you just proved that all of you are racist. And I said, suppose, just for the sake of argument, suppose the book was by a black person. The black people that I have quoted you in the past, they are qualified, they've been to school, blah, blah, blah. What have you done? And he'll go around making little snide remarks, but I just ignore him and stay away from him because if I stay around him, I know my temper, I'll knock him in the mouth and I'll get out of the job. And that's basically all I had to say.
It's been my experience. White people do network on the job. I'm sure he's probably talking to other white coworkers about what you all's exchange and his opinion of you. I would be cautious about white retaliation. It's just been my response that white people do network. Like the good judge, they do network. They do, and I would definitely.
Yeah, I have can I respond to what you just said?
Yes, sir.
They already know about me because an obese albinoid tried to get me to do something, and I told her that I'm not doing it. I'm tired of working like a dog to help everybody else. And when I'm behind, all everybody else does is just watch me work. And she responded saying, that's not. And ironically, the job that she wanted me to do was the guy that I just related the story to was his job. And I said, I'm not doing it. I'm tired of working for helping everybody else. Then when I'm behind, no one helps me. They literally watch me work. And then she responded, well, that's everybody's job, not just his. I said, it's everybody's job. When he's behind, then we're expected to help him, but he's not behind. He's in the corner sitting around doing nothing. Then the guy who brought the pallet to me, ironically, he was black, and I directed him to take it to the white guy, and which he did. And later on, I got the black guy by himself. I told him I didn't mean to be rude, but I'm sick and tired of doing everybody else's job in addition to mine. But he understood where I was coming from. He said because he goes through some of the same things. So those other albinoids, they know exactly what I am. They know I don't take no BS. And so they should know about him. But I know what you're saying about keeping a job, but I'm not going to keep a job at the sacrifice of my self-respect.
What kind of work do you do, sir?
I work in a meat plant.
Okay.
Right on speaking with the black person privately. That is great. Minimize conflict with other black coworkers, to talk to him privately and make sure you all were on the same page. That is excellent counter-racism.
And he knew what was going on. He didn't get mad at you for not helping the white people. That's great.
Hey, Gus. I hear what you were saying as far as I guess black people saying like, you know, it was kind of weird at first when you were saying it, but then I guess you were saying black people were basically saying that, you know, ambushing white people and things like that. Man, I guess that kind of rang true, what you said there. I think that these conversations that you have, for me anyway, they're just interesting. Like this dude, man, he, you know, I kind of laughed when he said over 100 books, because that's what I was speaking. I already knew it was going to be a number in the hundreds, you know, over 100, because, you know, we talk. But anyway, I think that's what I take from it. You know what I'm saying? Like just the consistency, you know, and the patterns, and I think that he's refined. So when you hear a conversation, you know, when I hear you, you know, if you listening to you or in other callers talking to the guest, especially, you know, a white guest or whatever, they're just these people are refined. So the white person that you're going to come in contact with, they less refined possibly, but you're going to find a lot of the same patterns expressed, you know, with these random or you know, these white people that you deal with every day. So I think that's important, you know, just to hear some of the mainline responses and thoughts and, you know, responses of things that they give. So, you know, I just think, for me anyway, that's I take a lot from that. And I was going to ask him a question, you know, just asking him, like, what would he account for these consistencies with these different white people lying all the time? But I didn't think he would, like, respond. I wouldn't have asked him like that, I don't think. But, you know, I didn't know, like, what his response would be, if it would be honest or constructive at all, you know what I'm saying? So I just, you know, asked him about his students or whatever, but,
Hey, 909.
Yes, sir.
You know, let me ask you a question, man. I just find it strange whenever I ask these historians that they're never going to answer the question right on out, you know? I mean, you're a historian, supposedly a black historian, African-American historian, and I'm asking you about Amistad, the revolt on the ship, and you got slaves in South Carolina who know where they're supposed to be from. This is the story we're told. You know, they're coming out of Angola. They know where they're from. They know that they've been kidnapped. They know something went down. You know, was it some contract that they had and they were bamboozled when they got here? You know, he seemed to know that there's some contract involved. He seemed to know that there's a status also involved. But he would still mum on the other information. That's why I'm like, okay, something ain't right here. If I'm sitting in front of any other historian, he's going to give me way more than that. But he's acting like he doesn't. I mean, is it just me? Or does anybody else get that?
Okay, I'll respond to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've seen doing a lot of with the white historian. I've had one even defended Abraham Lincoln and said he was a hero for black people, even though he's aware of the work of Lerone Bennett Jr. And I've also seen in general the white historians, they see what you know, and if they know that you know enough to refute them, they won't add anything to the conversation. So it's not just it's not just him. That's in general with white historians.
You know, a lot of white historians try to hide information from us, and when
exactly
that we know the truth, then they won't argue with you. Like a lot of Egyptologists try to hide the fact that Egypt was a black African civilization, and what we just found out, what they just found out was that King Tut, his DNA can be traced to Central and South Africa. And I told this white man this, and I told him that because he was claiming, because on that Unwrapping the Mummies on the Discovery Channel, they was trying to claim that King Tut was white. And I told him that King Tut had sickle cell disease, but he had a special type of sickle cell disease that we traced back to the Benin tribe in West Africa. So if King Tut was white, how could this king have a certain type of sickle cell that can be traced to the West African tribe and the Benin tribe? Also, they did a test on the Egyptian gene. They said the majority of the people that carry the Egyptian genes are Sub-Saharan Africans. Sub-Saharan Africans. And you can find the Egyptian gene in about every 1 in 10 African Americans. So there's a possibility all of us on this phone might carry that gene. So the Egyptians are spread out all across. And I created this shirt because I make shirts. I created this shirt, and it's a depiction of King Tut's throne. He depicted himself as an African-looking man. And when I wore it to the store, there was these white couples sit behind me, and I turned around, and they was frowned up at me and everything. They hate that.
Yeah, because you find out. See, that's what. If he would have stayed on, Lord, I would have asked some more questions as everybody else came on, because it would have been toward the flag, the Confederate flag, and who it really was supposed to be, who really had the flag first. Who are these peons who trying to pretend that you had a war between the gray and the blue, and this confederacies of the Iroquois and the Potawatomi, or the Powhatan Confederacy. You see, and you got all these these things going on with the Moors and all this stuff. And we're supposed to believe some peons came over here and started running things. And you got these people already here. And I don't know, that's why I asked if y'all noticed, when I mentioned contracts and bad contracts, it's like he started tripping up over his words and got real quiet.
Well, I'll say this: if this something that's digging out the truth, like his response would have been, he ain't, white people are consistently not about the truth. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's consistent. That's a pattern. And it was just weird. Like he said, Gus said something like critique or harsh critique or something like that. Thanks for the harsh critique. Like that, those kind of responses, man. I mean, you feel what I'm saying? Like, for those people that talk about ambush and this and that, like, yeah, for sure. And that's some confusion. That's almost, that's really clowning right there. That was like clowning right there. He was clowning the host. Like, yeah, whatever. Next, you know what I'm saying? So, it's especially for the people that get uncomfortable with these type, with the white guests coming on and whatnot, they're the very ones that need to go ahead on and be the first on the line and face that fear or whatever it is, and go ahead and ask their questions however they feel like they think they're going to sound or whatever. Because a lot of it, I think, also is they think that the white person, like this dude wear 100 books. I mean, it's nothing. 100 books last year, or more than 100. You feel what I'm saying? So I know black people, they thinking that they're not as smart or this, that, and the other. So take notes, write these down, listen to these conversations that Gus and the callers be having with these white guests, and then you just bring out more patterns. Let's see if this new white person that never been on is saying the exact same thing. Oh, he is, or she is, So, come, let's only
100 books. Only 100 books, but he can only bring up with something that has to do with church. That's it,
The only thing that I want out of a white person is to share with me information on how to neutralize the system of racism and white supremacy. Period. And their contact should be with other white people in dismantling the system of racism and white supremacy at the risk of death on their part. White people have more access to information about what happened to us, what we were before the system of racism and white supremacy,
our condition today, and they have already written down plans for our future better than anyone, including myself, can think of. They already have that information. The problem is white people, like the gentleman that was on the program, once again, is not willing to share or offer that information. And that is that person's way of practicing the system of racism and white supremacy, in my opinion. You will hear white people who are looking for flattery, looking to flatter us, and they're quite successful at doing it. They'll give you some information on how this white person is practicing racism, that sort of thing, but they won't tell you on how a lot of times on how they do it and how to neutralize it. Which is the bottom line, bottom line fact, in my opinion, is what I want in any type of contact with a white person. Period. I mean, as soon as possible, this problem has to be solved. As soon as possible, the most expedient way that it can be done.
Jeez Louise.
For the most part, it's just spinning wheels. Unfortunately, with a lot of non-white people, we get taken off course, lose focus, and go along with it, and be in these long conversations with these type of white people, especially, because to us it's gratifying that it's a white person that recognizes that there is a system of racism. Because to the other 9 white people that I encountered today, they weren't even willing to recognize it. So I'm glad I found one. So what? That's what I'm saying. So what? And I've tried to train myself on those matters. As I mentioned, before, because I've conditioned my expectation that I'm not going to get that from any white person. Not going to get it.
Well, Gus, would you? Well, I hear. I guess I agree with what you're saying, but when you ask the people, the white guests especially, to be as candid and as honest as possible, you do that knowing that they're not. I mean, I know you. I mean, that's not. But I mean, is it? What is it like? I mean, are you just asking that question just to ask, or?
It's like it has the effect. I'll put it this way: if you have somebody, I'm echoing a little bit. Somebody's on speakerphone, or if you got the computer playing in the background. Oh, okay, I don't hear that. Oh, yes, I can. If you got the program playing on the computer, turn it off. Or if you got speakerphone going, if you could shut that off. I'll give it a second or two to see if I still hear it. Still hear. Okay, good. Okay. I make an effort when I'm speaking with white people to say something to the effect of, let's not pussyfoot, let's try to be as efficient, honest as we can stand, be truthful. It is almost really a psychological tactic. If you are with somebody who is a thief and you let them know, I know that you steal, it's all good. Just, please don't steal from me today while we're hanging out. It's kind of letting them know I am going to be a little bit suspicious of you, and it will maybe the hope is put them on defense to not rob you that day. Not that this is going to be a long-term thing, but at least not to rob you that day, and that you know this about them, so you're going to be on the lookout for that. It's been my experience that doing that with some white people, it will get them to be a little bit more honest, and if nothing else, it lets them know I am going to be anticipating you to be dishonest and or just using buckets of words to try to confuse the dialogue. And at least in this purpose, while we're on the program, it serves a purpose for the audience, if there are people that are listening in, to let them know this is something that I expect. So when I interrupt, if I have to do a lot of interrupting, I've already planted the seed that I expect this person to be doing this sort of thing. So there's already a prompt for that white person and for any non-white people who are listening. This is something that I anticipate, and I'll be calling this out as we go. So that way they're primed, and it kind of, hopefully it will work to minimize that feeling of, oh man, why is that crazy Gus interrupting this nice white man or this nice white woman? They were trying to respond. They were giving us a response, and you keep interrupting, you keep stopping them. Why do you keep telling them that they're not, giving us accurate information? And I have seen sometimes where the white person, they will do a slightly better job at cutting down their buckets and buckets of words and nonsense. I feel like he still did a lot of that today, and I even felt the snickers. I was paying attention to that. I think some people could hear some of my response. Some of the snickers that he gave, where it was laughter, that to me is very telling. It's almost like, oh yeah, nigger knows a little bit. That's the way I interpret that, because there have been quite a few white people who've been on the program who've done that, who have snickered about things when they have been called out for their foolishness, or some of their responses have been evaluated to just be totally illogical and make no sense at all, and to contradict maybe even some of the things that they've said. They'll give a little snicker and then go ahead and agree. Those snickers to me are quite revealing.
Well, I'm currently reading a book called Trilateralism, the Trilateral Commission and Elite Planning of World Management.
When you say kinda?
No, I'm reading a book.
Oh, okay.
It's called Trilateralism, the Trilateral Commission and Elite Planning of World Management. It's a book edited by Holly Slar, and what they're trying to do with the combination of North America, Western Europe, and Japan is create a one world order. And what they're trying to do is eternalize white supremacy and forever keep non-whites under European rule. And majority of white people are an advocate of white supremacy. Pretty much all, and they practice it. They have been taught to, abuse, marginalize, subjugate, mistreat, exploit, and undermine non-whites. They have also been psychologically taught to see every black person as a nigger, and every non-white is less than. That's how they operate. The majority of white people deem themselves as somewhat of a power over others. A lot of white people deem their power limitless. You know what I'm saying? And I just don't know, how we can get them to stop practicing such system. We can at least try, but it won't work. You know what I'm saying? White supremacy is a global control mechanism of force, whether it's domination, in every area of activity, religion, education, population, media, war, entertainment, nutrition, relationship, or sex. You know what I'm saying? It's like Michael Bradley once stated, racism is predisposition to one people, and that's the white people. You know what I'm saying? They control everything we do. Where do we get the knowledge of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from? Sunday. We got it from them. You know what I'm saying? Who made the laws we follow? White people. How many black people follow the laws? Practically all do. 97% of black Americans are employed by white people. Whenever that general manager or CEO give us advice, you best believe majority of us follow that advice, because if we don't, we're out of a job. They control our food. They control us going to the hospital. Majority of black organizations are ran and funded by white people. When you go to these NAACP dinners, majority of the people that attend them are white. White judges, that incarcerate young black men. You know what I'm saying? You know, organizations in which critique the black thought and the progress in the black community. You know, almost 80% of black Americans are Democrat, which was founded in 1828. Well, the modern Democratic Party was founded in 1828. The majority of Democrats were slave owners. You know what I'm saying? The Democrats are a white liberal party that supports abortions, high tax cuts for rich and poor, and also responsible for throwing black men out of households. You know, I'm almost certain, you know, for the past 50 years or so, the Democratic Party has not helped us. You know what I'm saying? The food we eat, the clothes we wear, the computer we use, the websites we go on, make accounts on. You know what I'm saying? Blog Talk Radio. You know, where we get our advice from. We get it from white people. You know what I'm saying? Our names. Everything. We live in their world. The lawnmower we use to cut grass was made by them. The cars we drive was made by them. Public transportation. You know what I'm saying? The money we spend have their faces on it.
You hear me?
Yeah. I agree with what you're saying, but I have my own name. I have an African name. But I agree with everything else.
Yeah.
I heard one other voice. Did you have something you wanted to get in?
Yes, sir.
Have you heard?
I was going to say, yes, I was going to say, the only way white people is going to stop practicing racism is if they no longer exist. It's over their dead body, you know.
I ain't gonna lie. I'm gonna tell the truth. I hate white people because they mess up our way of life. And that was a point in time I used to love them. I used to take up for them. I used to want to hang around white people. But once you really understand the things they've done, it's unforgivable.
How would you define hate?
I can't really define it.
Me personally,
What? I'm sorry.
I abhor them.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
I'm actually doing an essay on hate and white people, and I define hate as extreme dislike that demands action. And it's just interesting because a lot of people say, and I talk about this in my essay. A lot of people say that it's not about hating white people, but if it's not about hating white people, if it's not about hate, then the system of white supremacy wouldn't be in existence because the system of white supremacy is based on hate. When you look up the definition of the word hate, all it means is extreme dislike. That's all it means. And Serena
with the word.
Serena and Venus Williams' father, even he said the white man hated me all my life, and I hate him. And look at how successful he was with his daughters. So hate. I don't think hate is a negative thing. I think hate is a positive thing because it motivates people to do action. Because you can't combat. I don't think you can successfully combat racism if you are in love with it. I mean, it's either you either have one attitude or another with it. You can't say you hate. You can't say you hate white supremacy and then say it's not about hate.
I don't know if I can say that because. Oh, okay. Was anybody going to say anything?
No,
can I be heard?
To say.
Can I be heard? Oh,
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. I can hear you.
Okay. All right. My name is Tyrell. Nice to hear all you brothers. Good show, Gus. Okay, now, like earlier, when I noticed, I've been checking out this show for a while, about a month. This is a high level of understanding that I have never seen nowhere else. It's more extensive or whatever as a word. But what I noticed about like all the guests so far, that like when you Gus, when you come at them with that angle of are they aware of racism, white supremacy amongst
white people, like, and they, so many of them say that white people are unconscious of it, or like they're not aware of it, and it's like, and then when you say, well, I think you're practicing white supremacy racism right now, right? As a human being, I don't feel like anything coming from a person's heart when they respond. Because if a person was to tell me that I'm part of like some conspiracy and that I'm on your show saying that I represent justice and I'm fighting for justice, I'll be like, not just offended, but I would be, as a human being, I would tell you, like, I see your point or whatever, but I don't, that's not the way I think. It's like I would give you some emotion about something like that. I wouldn't be like clinical. They sound clinical, all these people. It's just like something really sick going on in people that's like this, to me. That's what I get.
I agree.
There's something really sick in that. And basically trying to protect themselves because they don't want to be too exposed. That they're aware of it. You know what I'm saying? I can understand that part, but
I think that too. I think they're protecting themselves, and because like I said before, the peons, they come over here, they stole land, then they write laws to protect themselves for the future. And I think that's what they do all day long.
What do you mean when you say peon?
I think the majority of people that came over here were the first slaves. They're the ones that are they're the ones who started to think about stealing the land and keeping it for themselves.
But these people that open up all these books and documents, and they experts, so to speak, in the foundational knowledge records of this stuff. It's like, don't you see how much suffering black people have been through, and they still going? You drive around in your car all day, you see all these black people walking around looking dreary still in 2014, right? It's like, where is your humanity? Like, you tell me all this clinical sounding stuff. It's like, where is the heart on this stuff? I don't hear no emotion come out of these people.
Well, there's a male that came on here before, a white male, racist, and he said they don't have no land to go back to. So they got to do what they got to do because they don't have nowhere else to go, and they don't want to give up what they have.
Yeah, but I don't see no black people trying to annihilate these people. You know what I'm saying? So
it's about them being on top. It's about them staying on top. Somebody in this capitalist system, somebody has to be on the bottom, and they picked the darker skinned person. That's what I think. They picked the darker skinned person to keep him on the bottom, stole his name so that they can have a name because it's tied to the land. A lot of it, like I said before, my name is my so-called government name, is a Micmac nation name. It's not a so-called white man's name. And I find that out when I'm almost 44 years old. I find that out now, not too long ago. So it's like you really have to search for this stuff. And nobody can tell me how my name ends up in England and all over the Northeast, How is that possible? How does my name end up in South Carolina? Nobody knows.
Right? Isn't that what you're talking about?
I'm just saying. Right? I'm just saying the name, because nobody knows the origin of the name. When you go to their so-called land, they don't know the origin of stuff. It's like crazy. You've been there how long? You don't know the origin of anything. So now you start to question, well, were you there before? You know, were you really there before, or were you brought into there? See, so I don't think a lot of these peons are indigenous to Europe. You see, so I'm like, where are you from? You know, you see what I mean?
I don't mean to cut you off, but Gus, could you speak to what the caller was talking about, the lack of emotion that some of these white guests seem to have? Because I thought that was important. He's kind of, you feel me? He's thinking about it. So, what would you say, Gus?
Since we only have about 5 minutes left, see if I respond, and then if we missed anybody, or if you all have anything concise you want to get in before we wrap things up. I thought that was important as well, particularly if it's newer callers and you have observations, what have you. I would start by saying, number one, it would make me retch if there was a white person who was being emotional, like, oh my gosh, look at the poor black people. Oh, what can I do? That, I mean, I would have probably zero tolerance for that either. I would need to get to a toilet quickly to make sure I don't mess over myself, or we can just hit the fast forward button on that too, because I'm just not interested in hearing a blubbering, slobbering white person who claims that they really got some human, empathetic concern for black people, because I don't believe that either. But with what he said, I think that is an important observation. I try to relate racism to any other crime. If I was talking to somebody, even if it was something petty, and I was talking to them and they said, well, you know what, Gus, I heard what you just said, but I think you're a shoplifter, and that's just that. And whatever you just said, I think, you're just a shoplifter, and I'm just convinced. There would have to be some rebuttal, like, hang on a second here. I've told you I'm not a shoplifter. You don't have any evidence of that. And, there would have to be something, just out of being a human being, and a sense of righteousness, of being falsely accused of something, particularly if I'm out taking a stand saying, shoplifting is wrong. This is something that we need to be against. No for shoplifting or any other crime. If it was, I say I'm out here and I'm working against rape, and then you come back and say, well, hey, Gus, I think you're a rapist. There would be a sense of indignation, like, wait a minute now, that is totally inaccurate. And I feel exactly what you said about a lot of these white people. And I think you don't get that because they know it's true. I think you don't get that because they are. Right. They know the indictment is now accurate, and they cannot. It's what can I say? What can I say? And they even know trying to combat it when I have the foolishness that comes out of their mouth. Oh, white people don't talk about racism. Right. And when you get called on that, what is it that I can say that would make sense to counter the indictment? I've just given you some foolishness. I've just tried to convince you that 1 + 1 is 5. You called me on it. Now, what am I going to say? Am I going to argue with you? Yes, 1 and 1 is 5. I'm not a racist. I didn't just give you a bunch of malarkey. I think they know it would sound even worse. So that's why I think today what he said, thank you for the critique. And it's not a whole lot else that you can say. And I've seen that pretty consistently with these white people too. But I think that's standard. It's been a few. I think Jane Elliott is one of the few where she'll try to get real obstinate and all that. But even with Jane Elliott, she's an admitted racist. So, I mean, even with her, I think it stands out even more for you to get obstinate and act like, oh, well, I've done all this and I've done this and blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, you are an admitted racist. Timothy Wise is another one. You can do all that jumping up and down. Gus and the cows, they're full of it and they don't know what I'm trying to do and they like to play games. At the end of the day, I did say I'm an admitted racist. And that's all I can do is hope that most non-white people don't pick up on that and they minimize that and they don't really think, wait a minute, this guy is an admitted racist. That I think is crucial, and I think that's a pattern you'll see with a lot of these white people. When you're less confused and you start to give them some authentic pushback, they are not going to say they start to be a little bit more tight-lipped, and that's when a lot of them got a dip, not interested in talking to you all too much anymore. Let me go find some other confused niggas that I can talk to and win over easily.
The thing is like, okay, I'm not looking for a person to be like some kind of bleeding high liberal, and I don't think that you're trying to imply that that's what my mindset is either. But you did bring that out as a concept, I think. But the thing is like the human pie. And then another thing about them is like, okay, they say a lot of them say, well, I think this is the right word that they use in English. Like it's like effusive words that they use. I noticed they use words to like make confusion and buffer like the real meaning of things. It's like they talk away from a thing instead of talking towards a thing. And it's like when you ask them, like, do they believe there's a system of white domination, basically? They say, well, I don't think there's a system. It's like the aggregate of all these. They do that type of stuff, and it's like you're practicing white racism, white supremacy, like you say, because it's like the thing about system, though, to me is this: it doesn't have to be like a system where you go and there's this document and it's like got 5 lines of information. That's not the point. A system is just a system, like how you are sitting here pretending like you're not aware that y'all are acting collectively. That is the system right there. Y'all pretend that nothing is happening. That's the crime right there. You know what I'm saying? And the other thing is they don't dignify their conversation to be really vivid about the fact what their intentions are. I think that's a part of it too, why they say they're unconscious. It's not that they're really unconscious. It's like we're so involved in remaining dominant that we really don't really state that to each other that's what we're intending. We just in a codified manner, we say all of these little jargons that basically it's the same thing. It's a system of white supremacy. All those jargons and their jokes and their quips and their insensitive attitudes and all that stuff, that is the system, basically. That's the cultural system of it right there. And the reason why I'm using emotion, because it is emotional. You know what I mean? But in the future, I'm going to be more objective about how I bring this across. But tonight, I wanted to bring that part into it because there's a heart in this stuff, too, There's a heart to this. It's not just logic. It's also emotion in this.
For the victim.
Yes, definitely. Yep. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely.
And also the book, How to Deal... I was going to say the book, How to Deal with White People by David Goldberg says that white people are not emotional by nature. They don't have emotional feeling.
I've always found that about them to a great extent they are.
Also in this book that I'm reading right now called Black Labor, White Wealth, this kind of goes back to where one of the calls was talking about land. And this is a passage that I was reading.
We pretty much did our 3 hours. Unless you can do it in a sentence, we are going to wrap things up. Can you do it in a sentence?
I don't know. That's okay. I won't, because it's too long. So.
White labor.
But they created a law. They created a law called Finders Keepers, where whites believed that they had a license to steal land that wasn't.
Save it for Saturday.
That's a great suggestion. Save it for Saturday. I do have that book though. White Labor, Black Wealth.
Yeah, I do too.
I do too. Black Labor. I do have that book. Great reading.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, give us a chapter.
No, it's not. It's not in the book. But you ever notice when, because I don't have a car and I ride the bus a lot, and I notice how when white people see me walking down the street, they smile. It's like they smile at you when they see you down.
They got us where they want us, so they see us as harmless.
Domination. That's what domination.
It's the way white men. It's the way white men be smiling. They look like women when they smile. That's the crazy part about it. They smile like women at you when they
instead of giving you a ride, they'll wave at you.
Yeah,
you know exactly what you're talking about.
Deliberate racism right there. That's a pattern we can share on the weekend if folks that are listening in, or if you have any observations on that, white people passing you by, share on that as well. I will say I really make an effort to not speak to white people because it's just been my observation. White people don't speak to me. And this is over the totality of my life, generally speaking. White people don't speak to me when I'm out and about unless they are trying to sell something or unless it's got some sort of hidden agenda behind it. They want something from me, directions, advice, anything like that. And I feel like since white people are waging war against me, we have nothing to talk about. If I'm not pursuing that white person, I just make it my business, my code to not speak to white people, not what's up, not good day, not good afternoon. I fail sometimes because they'll catch me off guard, but I mean, I really try to be diligent about that. I don't hold the door for white people. That's my rule. White people, they never come to me with anything good, nothing helpful to pursue me. So I really make an effort to not speak with them when I'm out in public. And that's something I would recommend as well. Unless you are looking for that white person, or unless you have some reason to believe that this is going to benefit you. But I mean, 9 times out of 10, that has not been my experience with white people, random white people when I'm out doing my business, out in public, going places hither and yonder. At any rate, we will be back tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, Madiba, Long Walk to Freedom, installment number 10. Tune in. Really been pleased with the active participation we've had. We still probably got a month and a half or so to go before we get done. Hopefully it'll continue until the finish line. We'll be here for the compensatory call-in on Saturday, and we should have a black female guest on Monday. Workplace racism. She had a problem with white people, generally speaking, but she did have a black supervisor who also got pulled into it, who made things difficult for her on the job. So that'll be on Monday. If you have workplace issues, tune in. Having a black supervisor, that should come up once again. I know a lot of you all are ready to go upside the head your black supervisor right now, and or other black coworkers. So that'll be discussed again on Monday. Hopefully folks will stay safe in the meantime. If you're in the North Carolina region or the area where it got lots of snow, I hope you didn't lose power. Hope you got lots of groceries and all that other good stuff saved up. Stay safe. It was 50 degrees out here today. It is off the chain.
Hey man, shut up. We got like 20 degrees over here. You don't want to hear your 50 degrees.
It has been off the chain. Springtime is coming early, right on for Washington State. Stay warm, stay warm, stay warm. Bundle up, hot cocoa, get some coffee or whatever else you need. Stay warm, stay warm. I hope the sun will break and get rid of all the ugly, unnecessary whiteness that is afflicting your geographic location. We will be back ASAP, about 24 hours. Stay safe, get rest. Anybody want to do the prayer to wrap things up?
Yes, I'll do prayer.
Cool. And again, invest. If you think the program is constructive, racism-notes.blogspot.com, racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal is in the top right. Listener-supported counter-racist radio. I'm putting the link for the article. There are many reports, but I just like this one because it's detailed. The title is Cebull Probe Finds More Emails. Hundreds are related to race, politics, and gender. I'm putting it on my Facebook page. I'll tweet it as well. My Twitter is @UntilJustice, @UntilJustice. I'll put it out just because I think that is, people should know about this. You got a Chief Justice who's making these comments, U.S. Circuit Judge who's making these comments, racist emails all over. I mean, just analyzing the racist email that he sent out about President Obama's mother having sex with a dog to produce him. That's so much to break down and analyze that I can't even begin right here, but I'll post it just so folks can be aware. And this is another example. When people say that white people don't talk about racism, they are lying, and they know they're lying. I don't get upset about that. I just put that in my pattern folder, and then you can have something like this. Does this seem like white people are not talking about racism? The judge and the panel that deliberately obfuscated, watered down, and made vague the reports of what this judge, Richard Cebull, what he was doing, practicing racism. I'll put it on my Facebook page right now. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Hope it was a constructive investment of your Thursday evening. Caller, who's going to do the prayer? Take it away.
I want to ask the Creator to give us the focus to remain vigilant and suspicious of all white people at all times, to be patient with other victims, and to find ways to dismantle the system of white supremacy.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Context of White Supremacy. Signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
I'm a victim, brother. No problem. You're a victim. Yeah. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Even my conditioning has been conditioned.